So much for listening today. I see so many people in my work who are suffering from generalized anxiety. And they come to me because they want some relief from that. And the theme that I want to talk about is actually about the source. The source of the anxiety is often from a toxic dynamic in their current reality. Whether there have been patterns of that in their past, maybe they habitually became involved with a toxic dynamic growing up that created this feeling of things that weren't safe. And so they have an anxious personality type. But I'll tell you that if you are looking outside of yourself, for example, a job situation, living situation, government situation, that makes you feel bad and you continue to go back, continue to try to prove your worth, it's highly likely that you're dealing with a toxic dynamic. Because people who know their worth, who were never had to justify it growing up, don't stay in those situations. I know it's hard to believe and often will feel like there's absolutely no way out because you feel trapped. But the trap is your mental trap. The dynamic that's keeping you in this terrible situation, creating anxiety, is actually in your mind. I remember going through this myself, and people would try to give me options for how to relieve my anxiety and leave a toxic marriage. And it just didn't feel possible. The same thing happened with a work situation. People are like, why are you putting up with that? And I'm like, I have to. I got kids to support, but I didn't have to do that job. I didn't have to stay with that partner. I didn't have to keep the family in my life that see me as a monster. Those relationships are toxic, super toxic. So when I see clients going through this, I have to gently introduce the idea that it's highly likely that they are normal and there's someone in their lives who isn't. Because we don't live with generalized anxiety because we're anxious people. It's not a personality type. It's a reaction. People who are people pleasers, for example, they will become exhausted with the level of effort that they put into making sure everyone's happy. Why do you become a people pleaser in the first place? Because growing up, you had to be the emotional support tool for the adults in your life. So it feels extremely unsafe when someone around you is dysregulated. It can be as mild as being unhappy, and it can be as severe as being outright cruel to you, but you're still going to have the same people-pleasing response. And when you start to shift and grow, those people do not like it. They do not like to see you in your power because people who are toxic and cruel don't want you to tell them no. There's this boundary setting sort of growth pattern. And you'll see it in your own life with people who recently set boundaries. They'll say no to everything. The analogy that I use is that you are on some like ranch in Montana. I'm thinking of a place with lots of open space, but basically you're just on a huge property, right? And your house is right in the middle. And when you set boundaries, your boundaries are the fence around your property. It goes everywhere, right? And you say no. And you'll see this. People, you think, gosh, that's a little unpleasant or unkind, or why can't they be more flexible? Eventually, as you become comfortable with that boundary, you'll open up the gate at the end of the road and you'll let them in the driveway. But you can only do this when you feel comfortable enough that you say, yeah, I can tell them to turn around before they get to my house. And then when you feel really good about that boundary, then you'll maybe let them up to your front porch. And they're on your front porch and you're like, we can sit here and have a conversation, but you're not allowed inside my house. Because I can still go in and close the door and say no. When you become comfortable saying no there, then eventually you can let people closer. And so you've got this wide range of boundaries from absolutely not to, I don't like that, but I'll try it. And then just downright no. So again, you'll see people in your life, but now that you have this analogy that actually exhibit this behavior. They're just learning to have boundaries. And some of them never get to the point where they let someone on their porch. Okay, they're allowed to have boundaries. And so are you. So because your emotional safety, which in childhood is linked to a fear of death, because your caregivers can stop feeding you, and it's hardwired into us to please our caregivers. So if you have a dysregulated person in your environment, whether it's somebody who is drinking or someone who is just has some disorder, mental disorder that was untreated, people in my age group, most of the adults in our lives didn't have access to mental health care, and their grandparents definitely didn't. So if you grew up like this and you're constantly feeling unhappy in your relationships, in your place of work, where you're living, what you're doing for hobbies, your friends, if you're constantly feeling that those things are causing you stress and anxiety, and if they could only be a little bit better, I'm just going to let you know that it's likely that you are the product of a toxic relationship, whether it's right now or one you grew up with. And the great news is that you can heal from that. So I hope that was useful.